Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the incredibly fascinating world of meta-research, which is, essentially, the science of how we actually do science. We're going to be unpacking a really cool new study by researchers Mason Smetana and Lev Khazanovich. They've basically figured out a way to demystify the super dense, ever-growing landscape of modern scientific literature by using large language models to map the whole thing out. It's a real game changer, so let's dive into this.
So picture this. You're standing at the edge of a massive, dense jungle of information. Over the course of 20 years, right between 2005 and 2024, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or PNAS, which is a highly prestigious journal, published over 1,500 complex engineering papers. Now, you might be wondering, how do you even begin to read, understand, and categorize all of that? Spoiler alert, you kind of don't. It's practically impossible for a human to manually synthesize that much specialized, jargon-heavy information to figure out where the field of engineering is actually heading.
If you've ever tried reading a scientific paper and felt completely lost, you're absolutely not alone. This brings us to a really interesting phenomenon known as the curse of knowledge. It's this cognitive bias where experts understand their subject so deeply that they literally forget what it's like to not know it. They end up using incredibly complex language and jargon. For instance, the researchers point out that an engineer might casually throw around the term 100-year flood, just assuming everybody knows that it simply means a flood with a 1% annual chance of happening. When an entire field communicates like this, the science becomes fragmented and, quite frankly, hidden from the rest of us.
Section 1. Flaws in the old maps.
Well, to solve this communication crisis, scientists historically tried mapping things out by tracking who was co-authoring papers, or they just relied on the keywords authors attached to their own work. But let's be honest, relying on keywords is basically like reading sparse tea leaves. The authors of these 1,500 papers chose highly unique keywords that were almost never repeated. In fact, most appeared in less than 1% of the articles. If you just see isolated words like fatigue or aptamer floating on a page without any context, it's virtually impossible to build a broad, accurate map of the field unless you have a massive amount of manual expert oversight.
To try and automate this, scientists used to rely on older algorithms like latent Dirichlet allocation, or LDA. But LDA just treats text as isolated bags of words, which, really struggles with specialized jargon. Contrast that with the modern large language model framework. Unlike those old models, GenAI actually understands context. It can produce semantically interpretable themes. It doesn't just see words, it grasps the underlying meanings. This LLM is essentially our new, highly capable AI cartographer.
Section 2. The AI cartographer.
And this brilliantly illustrates the architecture of the AI detective the researchers built. It's essentially a two-stage pipeline. First, the AI scans the abstracts, the summaries of the papers, just to get the main idea. Then, it dives deep into the full text to uncover hidden connections. It's this completely unsupervised hybrid approach that brings together traditional machine learning with modern generative AI. Let's break down that primary stage into some digestible steps. First up, the AI transforms the abstracts into dense mathematical vectors and clusters them together based on their similarities. Step 2, they hand these clusters over to GPT-4o Mini, which acts kind of like the human brain here, generating clear, readable semantic theme titles and descriptions for these groups. And finally, step 3, they force the AI to reclassify the articles back into these newly named themes to really refine the data.
Now you might be thinking, couldn't the AI just be hallucinating the whole shebang? Well, the researchers were way ahead of that. They implemented incredibly strict consensus rules. The AI actually had to reclassify every abstract 5 separate times. An assignment was only accepted if it agreed 3 out of 5 times. On top of that, clusters needed a 60% agreement threshold to be considered stable. Anything noisy or weird was just pushed into a dynamic other category so it wouldn't mess up the map. They even stopped iterating once less than 10% of articles remained unclassified. When humans manually validated a subset of the data, it hit nearly 76% accuracy, proving this AI is definitely reliable.
Section 3. 20 years of engineering. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer mountain range of changing scientific focus over the past 2 decades. You can see a clear, steady increase in engineering publications in the journal over time. But the overlapping area chart is where the real magic happens. You can literally see the ebb and flow of human innovation right there, how certain topics swell into massive focus areas, while others kind of shrink back as the years roll by.
So the AI ends up producing this sleek, highly readable map of 16 stable research areas. Here are the top 6. Just look at how coherent these are. Nearly 17% of the papers were grouped under tissue engineering, focusing on stem cells. 13.7% were diagnostic technologies. The AI took highly fragmented, confusing terms and grouped them into these beautiful, understandable categories without any human seeding or prior hints. It completely independently figured out what the engineering field has been up to.
And to further prove the AI wasn't just, making this stuff up, the raw math actually backs it up perfectly. The vocabulary across all these papers aligns with Zipf's law, which is a famous linguistic rule. Basically, just over 20% of the words made up nearly 80% of all the text. This proves the AI anchored its generated topics in deeply grounded, real-world linguistic patterns.
Section 4. Uncovering hidden connections. All right, this is where the researchers initiated the secondary classification phase, unleashing the AI on the full text of the papers to find hidden bridges between different disciplines. But before we see what the AI found, we need a baseline: 44.3%. Almost half of these engineering papers were already classified by human editors at PNAS as crossing into other sciences, mostly biological and medical sciences. So we know going in that we're dealing with a highly interdisciplinary dataset.
To actually measure this interdisciplinarity, the researchers used something called the lift metric. Think of lift as our treasure map's X marks the spot for finding where the most intense intersections of human knowledge are happening. It calculates how much more concentrated a specific topic is in cross-disciplinary work compared to that 44.3% baseline average.
Looking at the results, the AI found that fields like synthetic biology have a massive lift score of 1.94. That means it is deeply integrated and borrowing heavily from other fields. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, pure engineering topics like material science and soft robotics have tiny lift scores, like 0.11. They stay firmly in their own lane, highly siloed, and discipline-specific.
So the crucial point is how the AI mapped this out mechanically. It took the full texts and broke them down into over 18,600 individual text segments. It then built this really complex bipartite graph. It mapped exactly how an article whose main overarching topic is material science might actually have an entire paragraph deeply rooted in biology. It literally mapped the molecular structure of interdisciplinary thought.
When you look at the big picture, the victory of this AI cartographer is honestly astounding. It didn't just summarize a bunch of text. It independently recovered the complex editorial structure of a massive scientific journal without any prior knowledge. It found hidden links that humans didn't explicitly label, and it completely outperformed traditional models in keeping topics diverse. It proved, without a doubt, that LLMs are incredibly powerful analytical meta-researchers.
So why does all of this actually matter to us? Well, as the paper points out, the potential for these tools to revolutionize science communication is absolutely immense. By using AI meta-research to automatically map and translate these dense scientific jungles into clear, readable categories, we can finally break the curse of knowledge. And doing that promotes transparency, speeds up innovation, and ultimately builds much greater public confidence in science.
This framework is a literal game changer. We basically now have a universal decoder ring capable of mapping out the most complex information humans can generate. So it leaves us with one incredibly exciting question to think about. What dense, unexplored jungle of human knowledge shall we point the AI cartographer at next? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep exploring.